All right. Well, through circumstances that are a little bit beyond our control, next Sunday we had a chance to have Julie Burgess come in. And I jumped at the chance because, well, I get to be pushy in a way that your settled pastor can't be as pushy. But the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod has just a remarkably unique opportunity. People will fuss at us and say, hey, do you realize that your average age is, 69 years old? And I get it, demographically, that's not a great thing. But there's also an opportunity for us to leave a legacy for the next generation. And not nearly as many of us are taking advantage of that opportunity. So 30 years from now, when your church council gathers together, they are going to say, thank God that Pastor Kurt was a pushy son of a gun, and encouraged all these folks to leave a legacy gift, for the congregation so that they can do some pretty cool ministry. And then the Sunday after that, we switch to that'll be Memorial Day weekend after that, and we switch to our summer schedule, which is, I think, the early service stays the same, but the late service gets pushed back until 10 o'clock. I'm not sure how that's going to work because I haven't started Bible class on time yet. Roy's going to have to get be extra pushy up there. Carol with the lights and the narthex going to need those for me. Hey, dude, quit yakking or don't preach so long. So we're going to do our best to get as far as we can. And one of you has been praying, I know, that we'll get a giant list of names like we have in chapter 10 and just skip them, which, well, we're going to do. Well, it just makes you thankful for those parents who were good with Daniel and Anan. Yeah, there's a Micah I see, and a Bonnie and an Aiden. So, all right. So chapter 10, the people who sealed the covenant, and obviously it lists their names. I want to say 6 years ago, my church was looking for a senior pastor, and they couldn't get one, so they brought in an interim senior pastor. And when you do an intentional interim ministry in your church, that means that there's some areas of brokenness that the intentional interim is trying to fix. And we had our fair share of conflict. And so one of the things that culminated with was part of the culmination of the intentional interim program, was a covenant that we signed. We had a worship service that lasted an hour and 45 minutes because we had this behavior covenant that we all signed, and we took time during the worship service, come up the aisle, sign your name. Yep, this is how I'm going to behave. Anyone want to take a guess at how long that covenant lasted after the intentional interim was gone? Megan, you are correct. Her guess was 0, not very long, and it was only a few weeks before, as things go, that behavior went back to what it was. So the point that I wanted to make is it's nice that you have this signing of the covenant. The folks say, yes, God, this time we're not going to commit idolatry. Yes, God, this time we're not going to commit this sin. And of course, you are all familiar with that, right? Because on Sunday we gather and we confess our sins. And I imagine that I'm not the only one that says, okay, God, this time I really, really mean it. I'm on chance, 25,412, but this is the one. And of course, usually by that afternoon, you have committed the same sin again. This is just our nature. We are going to be unfaithful until the day to the moment that our Lord calls us home. And the people of Israel are the same way. And I get it. The return home, the emotion. Yeah, I get it. Hey, God, this time we're going to get it right. But the reality is that God's people have not gotten it right individually nor collectively until we're part of the church triumphant. So in chapter 10, they make this agreement. All right. I'm going to pick up in verse 28. The rest of the people, the priests, the Levites, the gatekeepers, the singers, the temple servants, and all who have separated themselves from the peoples of the lands to the law of God, their wives, their sons, their daughters, all who have knowledge and understanding, join with their brothers, their nobles, and enter into a curse and an oath to walk in God's law that was given by Moses, the servant of God, and to observe and do all the commandments of the Lord and his rules and his statutes. We will not give our daughters to the peoples of the land or take their daughters for our sons. And if the peoples of the land bring in goods or grain on the Sabbath to sell, we will not buy from them on the Sabbath or on a holy day, and we will forgo the crops of the seventh year and the exaction of every debt. So they are full bore. We are going to keep the covenant that God made with us, that we haven't kept since Joshua brought us into the promised land. And so you admire greatly the intention. Yes, said.
For me, is that it says they bound themselves with a curse. But when we bind ourselves, we don't even go that far.
They're getting biblical. So when Moses, if you go back to Deuteronomy, and I forget what chapter it is, but it's a fairly well-known quote that he says, "Today I set before you blessings and life, or curses and death." You can choose to go into this land and remember the God who delivered you. Remember the God of the fathers of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. You can keep his covenant, you can keep his law, and all these blessings will be yours. Or you can forget the God who delivered you. You can chase after the things of this earth, and then these curses will be. So it really is going right back to Moses and the that admonishment when they got to go into the promised land. You're right. We don't speak that way today, but that's why. If you were here in the 8 o'clock service and we talked about our prodigal children, that's why the parents of prodigals pray so fervently, right? Because they know that the same thing applies, the blessing and the curses. If our children grow up to love and serve the Lord, all of these blessings are open to them. The forgiveness of sins, the promise of life eternal. But should they choose to reject that invitation, should they choose to say, God, thanks, but no thanks, I'm going to go it alone, well, then what awaits is going to be indeed that curse of condemnation, the ultimate curse of sin, which is eternal death.
What we call the second commandment.
I would think that this would be a violation of the first commandment, because that's, again, that idolatry is what got the Israelites in trouble, because they continued to chase after the Baals, they continued to worship Molech, they continued to go through the ritual, if you will, of their faith, but their hearts were far away. And that's all first commandment stuff.
I was talking about the part that he just mentioned. There was
The curse?
The curse. You don't take the name of
The Lord your God in
you don't
vain.
swear oaths, unless you
Right.
because it's not something that you can keep perfectly in the first place.
Correct. I don't know, John. I've never thought of it that way before. My mind just always goes back to Deuteronomy and Moses saying, I lay before you life and blessings, or death and curses, and you get to choose which one of those that you want. But yeah, I can see where it would be a second commandment issue. All right, picking up on verse 32. We also take on ourselves the obligation to give yearly a third part of a shekel for the service of the house of God, for the showbread, the regular grain offering, the regular burnt offering, the Sabbaths, the new moons, the appointed feasts. We, the priests, verse 34, the Levites and the people have likewise cast lots for the wood offering to bring it into the house of our God according to our fathers' houses at the times appointed year by year to burn on the altar of our Lord. So they're going to go ahead and rededicate themselves to this spiritual life as well, supporting the temple, that it is rebuilt so that all of these observances can continue. The feast days, the sacrifices. So this is stewardship. Verse 35, we obligate ourselves to bring the first fruits of our ground and the first fruits of all fruit of every tree year by year to the house of the Lord, and to bring to the house of the Lord, to the priests who minister the house of God, the firstborn of our sons and of our cattle, as it is written in the law, and the firstborn of our herds and of our flocks, the first of our dough and of our contributions, the fruit of every tree, the wine, the oil, to the priests, the chambers of the house of God, and to bring in the tithe. And just like every generation with the people of God, you did indeed have some who would keep that, right? You fast forward several hundred years or so from this point, and you have Mary and Joseph taking 8-day-old Jesus to Jerusalem, to the temple, where you have that encounter with Simeon, with,
40 days after.
was it 40?
Yeah, 8 days.
Right, okay.
That's how they know the wise men didn't show up right after he was born.
Well, yeah, yeah. They were still, yeah.
40 days after.
What, they might have still been traveling, who knows for sure.
But it was the fact that Mary and Joseph were keeping that letter of the law. So obviously you did have a remnant that was being faithful to all of this. In the back, Mr. John.
It seems in 36 that this seems kind of strange to me. We're going to bring not only the firstborn of our sons, but also of our cattle. How are we, but the two of them are in the same sentence.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to do a blessing on the cattle, are we? Are we going to sacrifice them?
Yes.
So why would we include the sons in that?
Well, because they belong to God. And so as opposed to sacrificing the sons, what they would do is they would redeem them
With the sacrifice.
with the sacrifice. Right. So they would provide a substitute sacrifice to redeem their children. And so you see the parallel of Jesus on the cross, that Jesus then becomes the substitute sacrifice in order to redeem us.
If you go back to like Exodus 20 and 21 and 20, those chapters,
Right.
It spells that all out
Yep.
specifically, that you will, you basically give your first son
To the Lord,
God,
yeah.
but you can redeem him through another.
Right.
Yeah, so that you're not literally sacrificing.
Sacrificing a kid, right. Yep.
But you also did that with the firstborn of each of your flocks.
Right. That was the final plague in Egypt. It was the firstborn of the families of the humans and the animals and the flocks that was killed by the angel of death.
So this is kind of like Abraham and Isaac too.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
That's another case of where something good turned into something bad. Because they sacrificed, not really sacrificed, but they paid the ransom, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
for their firstborn. But then when they began to follow the heathen ways, then they actually did sacrifice.
Right. So that's just the dramatic difference between the living God and the false gods. Where the false gods demand that we sacrifice to them. The real God flips that around.
And it also then, by extension, foreshadows
Yes.
Christ as the substitute.
Yep.
All of this.
Okay. They did come.
And of course, the thing, since a good chunk of chapter 10 is all about the stewardship aspect, it's always, a good reminder that God does this for us. It's not the Lord that needs all of these things. But as we practice good stewardship, it actually draws us closer to God because we then cling less to the things of this earth and cling more, of course, to Him and His Word. All right. Chapter 11 is a very long list of names. Like the entire chapter, just gives us the names and the numbers of the leaders of the people that lived in Jerusalem, and then the lottery to repopulate Jerusalem, if you will. They asked for 1 in 10 of folks that lived in the surrounding areas to come and then inhabit Jerusalem proper.
Well, at least they appreciated who went. Verse 2 anyhow, the people commended all the men who volunteered to Jerusalem.
Yep.
They at least they got thanked for it. And why would they not have wanted to live in Jerusalem? Was it just because it wasn't rebuilt yet, or?
Yeah, most of Jerusalem still lay in ruin.
I
It was
didn't
just
realize.
a core section, David's old city,
They
which
had
was just
gotten-
that one narrow.
But they had
Really?
sort of rebuilt the walls, hadn't they?
But it was only, at this point, it was still only around what was the old city of Jerusalem,
Oh,
which was the temple area, and then that area running down the ridge south of that. That was the original Jerusalem,
Oh.
not the spread to the north and to the west,
okay.
to fill up that plateau, the general plateau, which we refer to kind of as Mount Zion now.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I would imagine that it's pretty much, whenever the war in Gaza is completed, you're going to have groups go back in there and just rebuild all this stuff that was devastated. So, yeah, so it is necessary, but it's probably a difficult task. And then, again, in an agricultural economy, most of your wealth is with land, flocks and herds and, vineyards and orchards, none of which you get inside the walls of Jerusalem.
Well, the Romans were, was it the Romans that were taking over here?
No.
This was not, no, that's
No,
later.
not yet.
That's later. That's
No, you are a couple hundred years
I'm way ahead of time.
way ahead of time. Yeah. Yep. They'll have Alexander the Great come through here yet. And then they'll have the Romans come through. So this is even pre-Alexander the Great. Yeah.
They were just, we haven't learned anything either, have we yet?
Well,
I'm thinking of just in general.
God's children are remarkably consistent because you can change the time even by thousands of years, and you can still see the same behavior.
You turn on the TV, which we did yesterday, and there they are, battling it out, bombing here and bombing there, and you think, can't we ever learn? No, I guess we can't.
That's those people over there, though.
Oh, that's those people.
Yeah, there's those sinners over there. Yeah.
With sneaky ways. Oh, yes.
All right, verse 12 gives us another list, and these are the folks that are going to serve. This is the worship life of the temple, the priests and the Levites. And that's going to go up through verse 26. And to be honest, even when they get to the dedication of the wall, this is the same thing. I mean, they do so with worship, and they'll list all the singers and the folks who participated in that dedication. And this is, a practice that God's people still do. Whenever we, excuse me, build a church, you'll have your dedication service. I was fortunate enough to be in seminary when they built their first freestanding chapel of St. Titus and St. Timothy. So if you've ever been to St. Louis and seen the gigantic chapel that is there, when I was in school, that was a gigantic hole in the ground. And then my fourth year, they finally dedicated it. And it's something that we still do. I've gone in as a pastor when some of my parishioners have started a business, and they've asked me to do a dedication and a blessing of the building. I've done this for homes. When people buy a home, there's a rite of blessing and dedication that you can do. And so verse 12 gives that dedication, and again, all of the people, the priests and the singers and the stuff that was there. And the final chapter, which is probably going to get most of the rest of our attention today, chapter 13, sees an end to all the names, at least in most part. So let's look at 13, chapter 1. On that day, they read from the book of Moses in the hearing of the people, and in it was found written that no Ammonite or Moabite should ever enter the assembly of God, for they did not meet the people of Israel with bread and water, but hired Balaam against them to curse them. Yet our God turned the curse into a blessing. As soon as the people heard the law, they separated from Israel all those of foreign descent. So again, this is going to be a particular sin that Nehemiah and Ezra have had to deal with, this practice of intermarriage that was specifically forbidden. Today, we have a similar prohibition about not marrying someone who is an unbeliever, or if they are of a different religion. You have that New Testament verse about not being yoked to an unbeliever. Now before this, Eliashib the priest, who was appointed over the chambers of the house of our God, and who was related to Tobiah, prepared for Tobiah a large chamber where they had previously put the grain offering, the frankincense, the vessels, and the tithes of grain, wine, and oil, which were given by commandment to the Levites, singers, and the gatekeepers, and the contributions for the priests. So what is the implications of that? I know it's been a while since we talked, but Tobiah, was he a good guy or a bad guy? He was a bad guy, right? He actively worked against Nehemiah and the building of the wall. But now, as the temple is being rebuilt, because he was related, since Eliashib the priest was related to Tobiah, what did they do? They gave Tobiah, this enemy, a large room within the temple.
So they're reestablishing Tobiah to continue to do what he used to do.
Well, think about how Satan works, right? If Satan can't prevent you from going to church, what does he do? He tries to cause strife and conflict within that church. All right? So, whenever I teach this, folks are kind of scratching their heads saying, why would they give this guy who actively worked against them, who tried all kinds of dirty tricks to get them to stop, why would they give him a plush, large room inside the temple itself? But think about your own heart, okay? Think about your own heart and ask yourself, does the devil sometimes get a room in there? And the answer for all of us is yes, he does. Because that's where he can cause the most mischief, right? If Tobiah cannot get his way, get his agenda by causing external strife, what's he going to try and do then? Subvert things from the inside to try and get his agenda. And isn't that exactly what Satan does for you and I? Right? How many Christians lose their faith because of some cataclysmic external event? I've met some, right? I've met some. It happens. Hey, this person I loved got cancer, and I just, I can't worship a God who would allow that kind of suffering, and they reject him. But for most Christians, what is it? It's just this very slow, 1 degree at a time, right? Falling away. C.S. Lewis pointed this out. He said the road to hell is a gentle slope without curve or bump, so you can just go comfortably and quietly and peacefully.
Well, I had heard that Tobiah also was a friend of Elijah priest.
Yes, I was related. I think he was married into the family, so I think there was some brother-in-law action going on. Yep.
Well, and Gil, we can think that we're making the best decision. Now, I'm making up a scenario that just popped in my head here. That the priest in charge thought, okay, now Tobiah isn't quite on our side exactly yet. Maybe if I entice him this way, that I'll give him this room. Could be pure conjecture on my part, but you never know what people's motives are.
You never know what they are.
He might have a good motive, just didn't turn out to work, the way it appears.
Pastor,
Yeah.
you're also seeing this same thing today with the new pope and the news media saying, well, how progressive is he compared with the old pope? And is he going to follow this and that edict of the Catholic Church, or is he not? It's the same thing. It's
I imagine that there is a fair bit of quiet drama within the Vatican. All right. Verse 6. While this was taking place, I was not in Jerusalem, for in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, king of Babylon, I went to the king. And after some time I asked leave of the king, and I came to Jerusalem. And then I discovered the evil that Eliashib had done for Tobiah, preparing for him a chamber in the courts of the house of God. And I was very angry, and I threw all the household furniture of Tobiah out of the chamber. Then I gave orders, and they cleansed the chambers and brought back the vessels of the house of God with the grain offering and the frankincense. Okay, so this kind of becomes a precursor, right, to Jesus cleansing the temple, in that Nehemiah bodily takes all the stuff and simply evicts Tobiah out of the Lord's house. I also found out that the portions of the Levites had not been given to them, so that the Levites and the singers who did the work had fled each to his field. So again, right, if you're not going to pay the priests and the workers, you're forcing them to do what? To go fend for themselves. Okay? This is actually becoming a trend. A lot of pastors I know, when they are counseling young men about going into the ministry, will encourage them to have a degree in a field of study with which they can fall back upon. So I'm curious to see whether or not churches are going to ask their pastors to be worker priests on a more regular basis. So I confronted the officials and said, "Why is the house of God forsaken?" And I gathered them together and set them in their stations. Then all Judah brought the tithe of the grain, the wine, the oil into the storehouses, and I appointed as treasurers over the storehouses, and he gives the names there. And so the behavior of God's people is sadly predictable, right? While there was the strong leader present, he was able to kind of keep them in line, if you will. But as soon as he goes away, what happens? They tend to revert back to their sinful ways. All right. The rest of the verse, I've got to wrap it up because it's quarter till. He tackles the issue of intermarriage again, and gets the same result. While he is there advocating for it, they do a good job. But once we know historically, once he goes away, then they go back to, well, ignoring the statutes that God has given them. All right, gang. Thank you so much for your attention. I pray that we will see you next week for Miss Julie, and that you'll bring a friend.